good afternoon. We're really glad you're here, right here on the AFR Talk Network. My name's Crane Durham. This is Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. One day after Christmas, and what a Christmas it was. We'll talk a little more about that, the war on Christmas, and the war on Christians a little later on this hour. Plus, we'll be delving into the economic recovery and the forecast for 2014. A lot of positive signs, but are they real? We'll deliver. And next hour, we have former New York Post columnist and columnist for FrontPageMag.com, Arnold Allard, will be with us to tell you about the next bailout coming. And it's coming. It involves Obamacare. Captain Obvious just got here. No, that's not really Captain Obvious, so don't even play that. But first we go to our good friend, national security analyst for the Clarion Project, clarionproject.org, Ryan Mauro. Ryan, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing all right. How was your Christmas?
It went really well. It was, quite frankly, we hosted the family over here. And when I say we, I say Catherine, because she does all the work. And I sit there and say, just tell me where to move things, please. And she did an awesome job, and it was just, we're incredibly blessed. How about you, buddy?
It was all right. Had some family visiting, nothing unusual, but that's always a good time. But no, that's about it. No real good stories, no real funny stories to share.
All right. Well, there's not much funny. There's nothing funny about what's happening. Well, I want to hit the Flashpoint today in Iraq and what happened with the Christmas Day terror against Christians in Iraq. And my question to you in regard to this attack, have we lost Iraq?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's irreversible, but I think it's interesting to see the Iraqi government that, even though it's allied with Iran and Syria right now, is asking for greater American involvement, even though it was the Iraqis that were largely to blame, even more so than President Obama, for the withdrawal of American forces completely from Iraq, because it was the Iraqis that were saying we wouldn't grant immunity for American soldiers, so we would want to prosecute them, and that was the sticking point that prevented us from even having a training force on the ground.
And Vice President Biden didn't get the job done there. I mean, I recognize, yes, it's the Iraqis, but hey, we had Bush Cheney get the job done, and they left Iraq pretty much going in the positive direction. So I'm not trying to play games here with politics, but I do think I think we have to evaluate approaches toward foreign policy, and specifically the two fronts, as you've done brilliantly in your work with Afghanistan and Iraq.
I do think that you're going to see American drones striking in Iraq eventually. It's just going to happen because Al-Qaeda is growing so much in Iraq right now as a result of what's happening in Syria. And if you look at the numbers, at the height of the surge, when Al-Qaeda and American soldiers were battling, there were about 10,000 core Al-Qaeda members in Iraq. Over in Syria, the number's at least 15,000. So in terms of the threat to the U.S., it's greater in Syria now in terms of getting a safe haven for Al-Qaeda than it was in Iraq when U.S. troops were there.
Interesting. Tell me this. With attacks on Christians, this is going to seem like a silly question, but is there a overall goal and coordination with attacking Christians, and for that matter, religious minorities, including Jews, in the Middle East, North Africa, Muslim world? And is this something we're going to see more and more of in the sense of specifically going out and targeting Christians?
Definitely, because especially as terrorist groups get weaker, they prey upon groups that are more vulnerable to attacks, just so that the terrorist group can say that they're alive. So if they keep failing to hit high-level government targets and they're saying, okay, we need to prove to donors that we're still alive and fighting, blowing up a church is very tempting. Over the long term, this actually does hurt Al-Qaeda's aims and the aims of other, I guess you could say, more hardline terrorist groups, because some terrorist groups say that massacring Christians in the Middle East is just going a step too far, because on the ground, Christians have good relationships with their Muslim neighbors. When there are bombings of churches in the Middle East, even in places like Iraq, you see Muslim Iraqis coming out to protest it and, in many cases, helping to rebuild that church. There's pictures out there on the internet where you can see Iraqis going up and rebuilding the damaged portions of churches. It's really amazing to see. And so I think that over the long term, these type of attacks on Christians is very bad for Al-Qaeda's strategy. But as we talked about on your program, Al-Qaeda doesn't think like that. They just don't think about cost-benefit ratios, whereas other groups like Muslim Brotherhood and Hezbollah and Hamas say, does this make sense for me to do?
And what a story that needs to get more coverage about those Muslims who are helping to rebuild the Christian churches, those are the people that we have to speak to in the sense of getting the message out and grow that constituency. And that's something that we're just not doing enough of. And thank heavens for people like you who are bringing us those stories. Tell me something, Ryan. How does the only elected group, government, the Muslim Brotherhood, now is declared a terrorist group by their fellow countrymen in Egypt? How does that happen?
Right. Well, it basically happened because the Muslim Brotherhood was overthrown. They destroyed their own support by acting like all of the negative stereotypes of the Muslim Brotherhood that are out there. So they destroyed their own carefully crafted moderate image. And then when the Egyptian government came in, and that was at the people's request, the Muslim Brotherhood resisted that. And as videos provided to us by Egyptians shows, the Muslim Brotherhood did things like put children at risk in the hopes that they would get shot at by the Egyptian military so that they could frame a massacre. Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood individuals took shots at security forces in the hopes of provoking greater clashes. All of these types of videos and information that the American media didn't cover in their 30-second news coverage of the clashes in Egypt, but average Egyptians were putting together YouTube videos because they just wanted to try to reach Americans and say, look, your media and your government isn't telling you the other side to this story. And so there are a lot of valid reasons why the Egyptian people, by and large, the same ones who elected the Muslim Brotherhood, supported the crackdown, and why the majority of Egyptians support banning the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist group.
So if Egypt declares the Muslim Brotherhood a terrorist group, why isn't our government doing that? What are the standards?
Well, there's a few different reasons.
Yes.
The first reason is the Brotherhood lobby. You have all of these Muslim Brotherhood affiliates here in the United States that advise both parties, but especially the Obama administration, and they say, don't believe the Egyptian propaganda that they're terrorists, and they really go to bat for them. That then leads to ignorance, so you have those that just don't know any better because those around them are telling them a different message than what Egyptians on the ground are trying to say, and so they're not exposed to the facts. And then the third reason that the Muslim Brotherhood is not designated a terrorist group in the U.S. is really because of fear. Because if you're a State Department diplomat, the idea of designating and banning the Muslim Brotherhood is going to be very stressful and very messy and very unpredictable. It will result in dozens of mosques being under investigation and being raided across the country. Islamophobia, that cry of anti-Muslim bigotry, hitting new heights that are not even comparable to anything that you've seen thus far. You're going to have so-called allies like Turkey and Qatar going absolutely crazy, and those relationships get destroyed. So from the perspective of the State Department that wants to keep everything contained and controlled and not deal with another headache, it makes sense why they wouldn't want to ban the Muslim Brotherhood, but that doesn't necessarily make it morally right to oppose that. Ultimately, if we want to win the war against radical Islam, this is something that has to get done.
Well, we've got to be clear and we've got to be honest. And you state that in your article. You say, hey, look, it doesn't matter what you think the consequences will be in that sense. You've got to do what's right. Otherwise, we're taking a step backward. And I'm paraphrasing, but you can disagree, obviously, with the way I paraphrased your words.
No, I think that's true because it's basically appeasement. That's what it is. The Obama administration says we don't want to provoke the Muslim Brotherhood because they may be undermining American foreign policy and a threat, but they're mostly nonviolent. They participate in elections. And so if we were to ban them or come against them or stop supporting them, then they're going to get pushed in a more radical Al-Qaeda-type direction, and then you have millions of terrorist operatives willing to attack U.S. interests and perhaps even attack the homeland. And there is some rational thinking there, and there's evidence to support that. But like I said in my article, so what? I mean, yes, it'll be tough. But you know what? Doing the right thing isn't always easy. You still have to do it. And if we ever want to close this chapter in history of radical Islam, we have to go for the bedrock. And the bedrock is the Muslim Brotherhood and the underlying Islamist ideology.
What's frightening, and I think it's on the last page of your article and fifth to last paragraph, and the political influence of the Brotherhood lobby is enormous. President Obama even addressed the annual convention of a U.S. Brotherhood entity in September. It continues to advise the administration, just as it did 2 years before. The impact can be even seen on the Department of Homeland Security. And again, Ryan, when these are headlines. I mean, I look at that. That paragraph alone should scare everybody and pretty much say, hey, look, we're doing things very, very wrong. And the problem, as you've talked about it, is exposing this, having the mainstream media do its job and tell the truth. Obviously, the Egyptian people did just that in time and got the YouTube videos out to go against the narrative that was being conjured within our own country. So advice overall is just to keep speaking clearly about the difference between what we support and what we believe in versus what they believe in.
Right, and contact your local congressman, even your real local representatives, and educate them, because they climb up the ladder eventually. It's going to take a while to reverse the disinformation and misinformation that's out there as a result of the Brotherhood lobby and their apologists, because when you have the Egyptian people that elected the Brotherhood turning on them and saying, okay, we messed up and we need to ban them as a terrorist group, and you have average Egyptians sending videos around on YouTube to prove that the Brotherhood is a terrorist group, begging the American media to pay attention, and that doesn't get the headlines and that doesn't fix the narrative, it's easy to be discouraged. And so the only way it's going to change is if there are louder voices, more influential voices in the political realm that can bring attention to these type of clear facts. This is an easy argument to win. The question is, how do you get people to listen to your argument?
Well, yeah, and you address that, and you've got to expose the fronts and the people that are shilling for our enemy. And people get very uncomfortable when they say enemy. Yes, they are our enemy. And they have blood on their hands and continue to work to do more of just that. Question for you regarding Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, wishing American Christians a Merry Christmas, talking about our shared values. And my question is, are we going to see Netanyahu, as Obama goes into his final years of his administration, speak more directly to the American people about the importance of our relationship and our shared values with Israel?
Definitely, and I think this reminds me of a conversation I once had with an Israeli official. I was in the room and someone asked about the strength of the American-Israeli relationship in the wake of the Obama administration's policies. And he said, I believe that the relationship is still strong because our relationship runs deeper than administrations. And that point is one that I will never forget, because it really told me a lot about the bond between the U.S. and Israel and like-minded societies and governments, that our relationship, because it's based in values, can transcend the political disagreements we have from one leader to the next. And if Bibi Netanyahu is aware of that, then he recognizes he needs to speak to the next generation of Americans and American leaders, because Obama's not going to be president forever.
And that is the truth. And that is Ryan Mauro. He is the National Security Advisor to the Clarion Project, clarionproject.org. He writes numerous articles each week, and we're blessed to have him. Ryan, thank you. Great work, by the way. Must read. Egypt declares Muslim Brotherhood terrorist group. Bravo, my friend. Take care.
Thank you.
All right. Now, on the flip side, you'll hear that message from Benjamin Netanyahu and Edward Snowden wishing Americans Merry Christmas and a warning. Crane Durham's Nothing But Truth. AFR Talk.